This is fantastic. Great to see people in this indoor-outdoor space for this discussion with experts about stabilizing shorelines. Someone wrote me a nasty email and said, "Why are you doing something about that? That's really not important." And I was like, well, you should have lived through Ida with the rest of us and you would change your mind. But I'm State Senator Shelley Mayer, and I'm co-hosting this with my partner, truly my partner and colleague, Assemblyman Steve Otis, who is driving down from Albany. He was in session today. We were as well, but I did mine remotely. And he should be here in a few minutes, and he will be speaking. I want to thank the Jay Heritage Center. What a fantastic asset and partner. Thank you, Kevin, so much. For those of you who are not from the Sound Shore, and I'm not, every time I come here, I think about what a jewel this place is and how willing you have been to share for ideas of civic participation and knowledge, and I'm just extremely grateful to have it here with you. So we have a great panel who I'm going to introduce, but let me start by introducing our panel. Besides Assemblyman Steve Otis, who's coming, Katie Friedman from Save the Sound's New York Ecological Restoration Program Manager, the fantastic Nancy Sellickson, who has a new title now that she's not supervisor of the Town of Mamaroneck, is co-chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee Long Island Sound Study, and also my friend and colleague, Westchester County Legislator Catherine Parker. And let me just back up by saying I was at a program at the other building in the Jay Heritage Center that Save the Sound did, I think pre-COVID, and heard about the idea of living shorelines and stabilizing shorelines as a way to deal with flood mitigation, shoreline development, and restoration and preservation of our shorelines. I really knew very little about it, but I got to know more about it with my colleagues and Steve, who probably knew more about it than I, and we reached out to DEC, the state regulatory agency, and determined that they were not affirmatively indicating a preference when they did funding or programs to really support this concept of living shorelines, which I'm going to describe. And the point was, they were their response was, yes, we're very supportive of living shorelines. It's a very good way to preserve shorelines. But they were not using it as a preference for funding and other decisions. And you know, one of the roles of a legislator, pushy legislators like Steve and I, is to say to agencies, you're here to serve our communities, not just to sort of do it in a perfunctory way. And we think you're a step behind the times. So we drafted a bill that exists in the Senate and Assembly, and I'm very hopeful that the Senate version is going to be on a committee next week of the Environmental Committee of the Senate, and hopefully it moves in the Assembly as well. And what this bill does is it defines what's called a nature-based solution. So it is saying that a project that is supported or inspired by nature or natural processes and functions, and that also may offer environmental, economic, and social benefits while increasing resilience, includes both green and natural infrastructure. So in my simple way, originally it was explained to me, rather than building a wall against the sea or the sound or the river, we are going to use natural resources to mitigate the natural erosion of our shorelines, particularly on the Sound Shore. This also applies to the Hudson River, and originally we had river keepers here as well, but unfortunately someone got exposed to COVID. So our bill requires the Department of Environmental Conservation to basically establish rules to prefer nature-based solutions for programs as a preferred alternative for tidal shoreline stabilization, and directs DEC to develop guidance that communicates this policy, identifies new techniques, explains risks and benefits, and recommends efficiency among regulatory agencies. One of the challenges in this area, and I think Nancy's going to talk about it, now there's money on the table between the feds and the state. There finally is money to address some of these issues. But we have to use this money wisely and make smart, environmentally sound decisions as we use our taxpayers' money, whether it's federal, state, or local. We should be making climate change-based decisions in investments in resilience. We are trying to get this bill to push the agency in terms of funding decisions and to push the conversation, and that's part of the reason to be here today. In our bill, permits for shoreline management may only be issued for nature-based solution approaches, this kind of approach I'm talking about, unless the best available science shows such approaches are not suitable, in which case DEC must require the permit applicant to incorporate elements of nature-based solutions to the maximum extent possible. So we're trying to shoehorn them into doing the right thing with respect to climate change. And so, you know, some people think, why do a bill? The reason to do legislation is when we're legislators, we only have certain things at our disposal, budgets and laws, and a few other crazy things that happen in Albany. But this is our job. And the second thing is, again, and I think both Steve and I feel this way, our job is to push the regulatory agencies that authorize the spending of money, which we allocate in the budget, to do it in a way that reflects that climate change is one of the most threatening issues of our time, and that we have to make wise decisions with respect to investments in money. So I just wanted to speak briefly about some of the other things that Steve and I have worked on post-Ida that are less about uniquely stabilizing shorelines, but also are about our experience and our collective experience in Ida, which was absolutely devastating for this community, and not the first time. But one thing Steve and I fought for is a fund in the state budget to partially reimburse people who basically got very little back from FEMA. That was a problem throughout my district, which goes from Yonkers to Bedford, and people in every community I represent have been hit by storms, applied for FEMA funding, and got a little bit back. And if your basement floor or your ground level floor, where you may have had an office or a TV or your gym equipment, and you know you were lucky if you got something back if you weren't in a floodplain, this bill we fought for. We got $41 million. The details of how it's going to be released is not clear yet, but that was a win. These things are not easy, but that was a fight for the thousands of people in our district who really struggled. And don't forget all the cars that were destroyed, where people really, I have one place in my district where 200 cars in a parking lot were completely destroyed, every car that anyone owned in that building, those buildings. Secondly, we have a second bill that we did together to force the state building code to consider flooding resiliency when they authorize permits as the model for local building codes. And that bill, which passed the Senate this week, expands the state building code group that decides to have a technical expert in flood mitigation on the codes council, and to ensure that the decision about building codes at the state level encompasses consideration of flooding. Thirdly, I have a bill to create the New York State Office of Flooding Prevention and Mitigation, so that you don't have to go to 10 different agencies to figure out who you're supposed to go to, which is a problem right now. That is a longer haul, I would say, than my other bills. And we have a bill, Steve and I, with others, to allow buyout of homes that are no longer going to be sustainable. And certainly in many communities that we represent together, including Rybrook, some in Harrison, places on the floodplain, Mamaroneck, there are homes that are just not going to be habitable if we have another Ida. And people want to move, and they want to be paid for what their house was worth before Ida. And there is a program, and we are trying to increase it, and we're working very closely with all the municipalities to get them to apply so that, if possible, we can get some flooding relief for people who literally are never going to be able to live in their homes again. So I am going to stop, because that was really a lot, maybe more than I should have said. But I'm going to invite up, because Steve's not here, Katie Friedman, who, as I mentioned, is the New York Ecological Restoration Program Manager for Save the Sound. Just briefly, and I think I heard her speak before, and she was the one who educated me. She manages the New York Ecological Restoration Program, including river restoration, living shorelines, and green infrastructure projects in Westchester, New York City, and Long Island. She most recently worked for New York City Parks before this as their aquatic ecologist, where she developed a watershed management plan for the Harlem River and managed diodromus, is that the correct word? Diadromus, I'm not sure which, fish restoration efforts on the Bronx River. And I'm very happy about that because that's another longstanding issue for inland flooding, which I've been very passionate about for a long time. So it's wonderful to have Katie here, and she's going to speak about what Save the Sounds programs are in this area and how we can collectively do better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really so honored to be here with such fantastic champions of this work, folks who have put their heart and soul into restoring the sound for many decades. So thank you, Senator Mayer, Assemblyman Otis, who's coming, Nancy Seligson, Legislator Parker. It's really a treat to be here. As Senator Mayer explained, my name is Katie Friedman. I am new to Save the Sound. I'm the New York Ecological Restoration Program Manager, and we'll be talking about Living Shorelines with you today. So Save the Sound is an environmental nonprofit. We fight climate change, protect and preserve endangered lands, and work to restore our natural ecosystems in the Sound. And our work spans the Long Island region, so both Connecticut and New York. We have an ecological restoration team that has been hard at work for over a decade, restoring our rivers, our marshes, taking out dams, and developing watershed management plans. And my job is to expand all of that work further into New York. So as Senator Mayer explained, working in Westchester, the Bronx, Queens, and the North Shore of Long Island. And I wanted to give a thank you to Livy and Rob Alexander for all of their generous support, helping to make this program possible. Yes, thank you. And we can play many different roles. Our bread and butter is to serve as project managers, so taking the lead on a project, identifying it, seeking grant funds, and then bringing it through implementation and monitoring. But we're also able to partner with groups in the region to help build capacity, work with municipalities directly, and then at a minimum, convening and facilitating and educating like we're doing today. I wanted to start talking about coastal wetlands. I'll mention these a lot through the presentation. So coastal wetlands are really unique ecosystems. These get flooded by water either permanently or throughout periods of the year. Freshwater wetlands are flooded by freshwater, and then tidal wetlands and coastal wetlands receive incoming saltwater from tides. And these plant species and ecosystems have evolved very uniquely over time to be able to withstand such changing environments. There are so many benefits to wetlands. I could talk all day about it, but I just have a few up here. So our wetlands along the coast help protect our upland and our infrastructure from waves and storm energy. As a wave comes and meets the tall grasses in the salt marsh, those grasses are slowing down wave energy and providing a buffer for our shores. They're also able to absorb water, so these are fantastic flood storage ecosystems, being able to capture and filter water that's coming up from the upland and also from the seaward side. And they are such critical habitat for a variety of fish species. Wetlands are known as nursery grounds for young juvenile fish. They're also a really fantastic and critical ecosystem for threatened bird species that we find here in New York. All of the plants that you see, all of these grasses, this is Marshlands Conservancy, that you see are constantly photosynthesizing, which means that they're capturing carbon from our atmosphere and in that way helping to mitigate climate change through carbon sequestration. At the same time, they are absorbing nutrients from our water bodies that can be overburdened with nutrients. And then lastly, we love to recreate in them. So they're just such a fantastic resource. And as you all are aware, while you're here today, our coasts are experiencing so many different threats. These are just a few. We are seeing coastal erosion, and also just taking a step back, our coastlines here along the Sound, before they were so developed, were a series of natural tidal marshes, dunes, beaches, and as humans developed our buildings, our homes, our parking lots along the coast, that infrastructure has become more and more vulnerable to this coastal erosion that would normally happen more naturally. With this development as well, our resources and our infrastructure are threatened by sea level rise and flooding. And if you're a marsh and you're thinking about sea level rise, under conditions where you have space to move and grow, you'll do okay. So in the past, sea levels have changed dramatically if we're thinking in geologic time frames. Today we have sea levels at a certain rising at a certain rate, and they'll continue to rise. And if you're a marsh, you'll be able to migrate upland as the sea is rising as well. But if you have built infrastructure, that marsh is not able to move and migrate upland on further elevation, and so you get a marsh stuck between the sea and a hard place, and over time it's going to drown, and we're already seeing that happening. So how can we both protect the infrastructure along our coasts and restore these critical ecosystems? That's where living shorelines come into play. So living shorelines is a term that's used to describe many different techniques to stabilize shorelines while at the same time restoring and protecting natural resources. These are examples of helping to replant our marshes, using oyster reef material, and I'll go through some of the techniques. But compared to hardened shorelines, they provide many benefits. So when I say a hardened shoreline, I'm referring to a bulkhead or a seawall, riprap. These are the traditional shoreline practices that property owners use when they're worried about erosion on their landward property. And these are static structures, right? They stay in one place. They don't grow. They're at one elevation over time. And they actually, in that way, provide shorter term protection and only protect the land that's right behind that hard shoreline. Also, when waves come and hit that hardened shoreline, they tend to bounce off of it and erode the neighboring properties. So it can actually accelerate erosion in the area. Living shorelines, on the other hand, like I said, they provide so many ecological benefits. They're actually quite cost effective. There's a recent study that I wish I had a slide on, but I'm happy to share with you, that showed that living shorelines are more cost effective on a per linear foot basis and over the lifetime of the shoreline. They're more resilient to storms, so a living shoreline is made of living things, and so as sea level rises, that marsh can grow and migrate. The oyster reef that you may restore will continue to grow and expand. So as our environment changes, a living shoreline changes along with it. There are wonderful resources about living shorelines. I have a few slides at the end. This is one, a great graphic from NOAA. So living shorelines not only protect our shore in the moment, but the plants in that marsh are able to actually trap sediments as tides wash over the marsh, and in that way they're able to accrete sediment and grow vertically over time as well, and there's been some great case studies of that. There's a fun fact: 15 feet of marsh can absorb 50% of a wave's energy, so really cutting down on the erosive forces of waves. And there's just so many benefits that they provide all at once. There's a lot of different techniques. These are some examples of the most common techniques along our coastal tidal shorelines. For example, you can regrade your property to a gentler, more natural slope. You can put native plantings in to restore salt marsh. You can put in different types of shellfish substrate, so hardened substrate that oysters and mussels can attach to and then grow over time. There's also the ability to plant trees and shrubs, more woody herbaceous plants whose roots hold in the soil. If you're having a lot of high wave energy at your site, there's also options to install what are sills or breakwaters. So those are either stone or reef habitat further out into the water. And you can combine all these approaches in hybrid techniques. So these next few slides show some cross sections just so you can get a visual of what a living shoreline may look like. This one has a stone sill in the water that's going to help break wave action as the waves come towards the shore. And right behind that sill is clean sand that folks can place and then plant with salt marsh species and create a nice gradient upland. Another example is restoring marsh using logs or core logs to help stabilize them in with stakes and some stone toe support on the seaward side. Another example is to use that sill or breakwater mechanism, but with oyster reef. So that can either be bags of shell, piles of loose shell, oyster castles, oyster reef balls. There's so many exciting new techniques out there to restore our shellfish and help protect our shorelines. And forgive me, you may see this slide in another presentation as well, so I won't stay too long on it. But this is really to share the point that living shorelines are unique to their individual locations. So it all depends on how much wave energy you're getting, how protected you are along the coast. And there's a range of practices that can incorporate just vegetation and rocks or oyster reef. And then in high energy settings, you will have to rely on more hardened structures to protect your shoreline. Next, I'm going to show some examples, and this is my favorite one. This is at Stratford Point in Connecticut, a really fantastic success story. So here's the before picture. This is a project that was led by Sacred Heart University, UConn, and Circa up in Connecticut. You can see there's erosion occurring, and they're trying to protect it with some sandbags. And this is the after. Yeah, I was excited for the wow factor. So here, in this situation, they installed what we're calling oyster reef balls out in the intertidal zone. Those are helping to slow and break down wave energy. They planted this plant. This is Spartina alterniflora. It's a salt marsh cordgrass. And they monitored the site. So they found over 2 years that the marsh that they planted tripled in size on its own, because of all the sediment that accumulated over time. And they also found that these oyster reef balls reduced wave energy by 30% and reduced erosion both beyond the reef balls and landward. So this is a really fantastic example. And it's a large-scale example. So you don't have to have a whole swath of beach to protect. This can also happen on private property. Even smaller, more distributed living shorelines can make a big difference in our larger sound ecosystem. So I was given permission by a wonderful property owner to showcase his project and his site. So this is in Larchmont. You can see this is a seawall that he owned that jutted out. Let's see if I can use my mouse. Jutted out into Hummocks Cove. And this area was once wetlands. You can see some remaining wetlands adjacent to this site. And so this property owner decided to bring back their seawall and install a small-scale living shoreline on their property. So this is the before, and that's the after. And this right here is an osprey nest, and that was the extent of the seawall, if you can see, so here, this is an example of a private property owner cutting back their seawall and expanding marsh. And now we have this continuous marsh that's able to connect with its adjacent property. And what's also really cool about this site, that brown patch there, the lighter brown patch, is high marsh habitat. So salt marshes have different habitat types depending on their elevation. High marsh is a higher elevation marsh with certain types of grasses. And this type of ecosystem is getting more and more rare throughout the Long Island Sound, and particularly our region here in New York. And high marsh habitat is critical habitat for salt marsh sparrow. That's a bird species in decline. They build their nests on the marsh, and as sea level rises and the tide inundates their area more and more, their nests get drowned. So when I see high marsh habitat out and about, it's really exciting. And so this project expanded upon that marsh. In this next photo, you can see this area at low tide. This site has some stone toe to help support the marsh expansion. There's some core logs staked in, and then there's low marsh plantings and high marsh plantings. And they also included a boat ramp, so including some recreational aspect as well. The next picture I'm going to show you is a close-up of this area. So this landowner recognized that beneath their seawall was bedrock. And so when they cut back their seawall in another area, they exposed this beautiful rocky intertidal habitat. And when he sent me this email, this photo in an email, he explained that he's been noticing that gulls have been dropping clams and shells on the bedrock, and that there's actually shell beds forming now in the crevices. So the more heterogeneity, the more diverse, pockets of space that you can provide, the better habitat. So this has tide pools and great rocky intertidal habitat. All right, and Save the Sound is actually about to start our first Living Shoreline construction project in Queens. This is a great example of a community that decided to design a living shoreline. This was led by the Douglas Manor Environmental Association, who developed a design with their community, reached a point where they asked Save the Sound to help us to get funds and to move this project through construction. So we were able to raise funds thanks to the Long Island Sound Futures Fund and Congressman Swazi. And this is a rendering that they came up with. So this will involve salt marsh restoration, oyster castles. So this is another technique of concrete Lego blocks that you can arrange in different designs based on the wave energy and your site specifics. And then there's also some components right up against the bank that change based on the waves hitting that section of the shoreline. So you can see farther up, we get the higher wave energy, and so the design calls for larger stone and plantings. Further down, there's a technique that's called bioengineered crib wall. This is planks of timber that are set up and actually interplanted with woody plant species whose roots will grow through and stabilize the banks. And this was another rendering from this project. This is a unique situation which we're hoping to see more of, where the community recognized that their recreational field that you can see, called Memorial Field, was getting flooded time and time again. And instead of building up a wall around it, they recognized that they could actually regrade the shoreline and allow for marsh migration over time and be able to expand the marsh that was clinging on along their coast and protect their roadway and their recreational field. So we're so excited to work with them to make this vision a reality. All right, my last few slides will be on resources, because this is a really always up-and-coming process, Living Shorelines, and there's more and more information every day. So I wanted to tell you about the Living Shorelines Academy. This is a fantastic site that has classes, it has project examples, it really does a great job communicating the concepts of living shorelines. And I wanted to point out on their site, they have modules specifically for property owners that you can click through, and they're really helpful. NOAA and their fisheries group has really fantastic resources as well, and I'll be able to share these slides and links with you all. And then New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has some great guidance documents out there. The tidal wetlands guidance document that you see, this is a really great guidance document for how to move through the permitting process if you're interested in developing a living shoreline on your property. And similarly, they have a guidance document about nature-based features to use for flooding and erosion control. I also wanted to shout out NUIPIC. They have a fantastic report put out, I think last June. This is the salt marsh conservation planning for coastal Long Island Sound with a specific focus on Westchester County. So they're able to look at 6 wetland sites, and they developed a really great mapping tool that helps you to visualize how the marsh will change, where it will expand, where it will get flooded out under different sea level rise projections. And there's a lot of great resources in there. And last but not least, there's so much great work that is happening in Westchester as well on the Hudson River side of our county. And so I wanted to point you to the Hudson River Sustainable Shorelines Program. I used to be an AmeriCorps member, and I worked for DEC in this area. And they have great webinars pretty frequently, bringing in experts to talk about sustainable and living shorelines. And they also have an interactive map where you can click through and find examples of sustainable shorelines in New York and learn more about them. So thank you all so much. I hope this was helpful. Yeah.
Katie, that was fantastic, really. And now Steve is here, and we're going to call on him. Steve, what has happened so far is I tried to describe the bill, and then Katie sort of overpowered me with explaining the bill in real terms and showing those fantastic pictures that make it real. So, welcome. Thank you for driving fast down the throughway.
Sometimes Shelley and I follow each other. I drive a little faster, and so I promised Shelley, she doesn't know what's coming, but I promised her that I would send her a guidance video on how to follow me when we're going from event to event. And the clip I'm going to send her is the chase scene from Bullet. So, so I'm going to give a short talk about an offshoot of this, and there's a flyer around here. Coastal resiliency is so important. Katie gave a great presentation, and there's so many reasons that it's important to change everyone's orientation about shorelines, and it's about resiliency in sea level rise and storm events, but it's also better for nature, better for habitats, and it's something we have to do something about. What I want to talk to you about is a new initiative that is being spearheaded by the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions, NYSAC, which I'm on that board. I've been on that board for over 30 years. And so the new initiative is to create for Westchester County and for Long Island, both the south and north shores of Long Island, a coastal resiliency network. So what is a coastal resiliency network? It's really trying to pull together all of the players in a region, share information, learn about what other communities are doing and seeing if they fit for your locations. This has been going on for a number of years on the Hudson River side. Going up the Hudson, a number of communities saw that they were having coastal issues and they needed to talk to each other. So they created a coastal resiliency network, and they've been doing that in their own way for a number of years. The city of Kingston is very involved in that, and other groups are involved. Obviously, groups like Scenic Hudson play a big role. Riverkeeper is there. But we have a real opportunity here to do a lot more in terms of our shore on Long Island Sound, the Nassau-Suffolk shore on Long Island Sound, and one of our partners is somebody on the South Shore as well, to try and pull together the municipalities, the environmental groups, the conservation commissions, sustainability committees, environmental management councils, who even within each of these counties don't necessarily talk to each other as often as they should. But here's something where people really aren't as up to speed about living shorelines and coastal resilience the way they should be. And so we have to jumpstart it, and you're going to hear from Nancy Sellickson in a bit, and some of the great things she's doing in Long Island Sound. But the big thing is there's an opportunity right now. This is a special moment in time where there's going to be new federal money that can be used towards a lot of these projects. There's going to be, hopefully with the passage of the Environmental Bond Act that New York State has on the ballot, $4.2 million in November. A lot of that money is dedicated to resiliency and resiliency projects. Some of it, sort of geared towards habitat, some of it geared towards flood mitigation. So for our region, for Long Island and for the Westchester County shore of Long Island Sound, this isn't a thing where I think we can take oh, let's take 3 years to coalesce, let's take a year to coalesce. I think we have to pull people together very quickly, have groups talking, have meetings, and get the communication going so that we can benefit from everybody else's knowledge. And around here, most communities have done some form of hazard mitigation plans, and some of them may be old science, some of them may be new science, but there's a lot more we can do, and the sharing of information will be very helpful. So there should be a handout outside for a Zoom meeting next week, May 12th, middle of the day. I think it's 12 to 1:15, something like that, set up by the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions. There are 3 speakers, and we want to get this out to environmental groups, local governments, local conservation commissions, other kinds of committees. The real focus of this Zoom is to talk about the different funding opportunities that are emerging right now. And if you're not an elected official, but you're in your community as an activist or on a committee, this is an opportunity to alert your local officials there's money in a variety of ways to do creative projects like the kinds of things that Katie was describing, and make a real impact on nature, on flood resilience, and just do a better job for these communities. You're going to hear a presentation. I don't think Catherine has not gone yet, no? But you're going to hear a nice presentation about something close by on before the Edith Reed Sanctuary in that sector over there, where years ago Westchester County did a very good vegetation improvement project, and it got blown away by Sandy, and then the previous county administration didn't really come in and replant, and so the damage has gotten worse. But there are great opportunities there, and you're going to hear some of that from Catherine. But I think this is a good turnout on a beautiful day. We're sort of outside because Suzanne has the windows open, the doors open, and so let's go on with the next presentation. But look at that May 12th Zoom. It is a great supplement to what Shelley and I are working on together in Albany and this presentation today. So thank you very much. Oh, great, sure. So next up is Nancy Sellickson, who I've known for decades and she's co-chair of the Long Island Sound Citizens Action Committee, and was involved for a long time on all those issues and continue to be those, but then she served many years until just last December as supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck. So what she did when she became supervisor, she did good environmental things as a local official. She didn't forget where she came from, but she never left the Long Island Sound stuff. And so when she decided she wasn't going to run, and I said, well, that's a big loss for Mamaroneck, but I said to Nancy, I know we're going to continue to work together on good environmental projects the way we always have, and here we are. So, Nancy Sellickson.
Thanks, Steve, and it's such a pleasure to be here today in this beautiful spot where we have the largest intact tidal wetland in Westchester County, is in the marshlands. I need those glasses, though. Thank you. So as Steve said, I have been involved in Long Island Sound water quality advocacy issues for a very long time and continued that through my work when I was supervisor of the town of Mamaroneck. I actually was president of the board of Save the Sound a very long time ago. I chaired the Westchester County Environmental Management Council. I chaired our Coastal Zone Management Commission in Larchmont and Mamaroneck. And now I am and have been actually for a long time, the co-chair of the Long Island Sound Study Citizens Advisory Committee. How many folks know about the Long Island Sound Study here? All right, that's more than most. Thank you. I got to try and explain it to you because it is really important, and it's a great partner with New York State and with Connecticut, and wants to be a great partner with municipalities. It is a federal program. It is part of the National Estuary Program. It's called the Long Island Sound Study. It's a misnomer. It's not a study, although lots of research goes on. So it's a partnership with the federal government, the EPA, federal agencies like NOAA, USGS, and state environmental agencies, so DEC in New York and DEEP in Connecticut, universities, UConn, Stony Brook, lots of other schools as well, and then a lot of NGOs, municipalities, and organizations that focus on advocacy, education, research, monitoring, all kinds of things. I am the New York co-chair for the Citizens Advisory Committee, which is one of the advisory agencies as part of this big management conference. We have a lot of influence, though, because we're very well organized, and we have a lot of voices that participate in a very serious way from all over the Long Island Sound watershed. And we have a Bible. It's called the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan. We call it the CCMP. And that Bible gets updated every 5 years, but it doesn't get really rewritten except every 20 years, because everyone has to approve it, the EPA, the state environmental agencies, and it gets really complicated. But the CCMP is divided into themes and goals and ecosystem targets and implementation actions. So the Long Island Sound Study is funded by the federal government through a congressional appropriation, which usually was like $4 to $6 million for most of my career, until a few years ago. If you might remember that Nita Lowy was the chair of appropriations, and she was a great champion for Long Island Sound. And now we have Rosa DeLauro, who is the congresswoman from New Haven, who also is a great champion for Long Island Sound. The congressional appropriation for Long Island Sound was $30 million this year. That's unbelievable. And the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, which passed, provides $100 million for Long Island Sound over 5 years. So that is a windfall of money for this program, which has desperately needed it all this time. I mean, I was embarrassed and frankly horribly jealous of the Chesapeake Bay and Great Lakes because they got a lot more money than Long Island Sound. Long Island Sound is the most populated, densely populated estuary in the United States. 10% of the population of the U.S. lives within 50 miles of Long Island Sound. Think about that. Of course, it includes the city of New York. So this incredible windfall of funding has led the Long Island Sound Study to be able to do better programs, bigger programs, and more outreach. One of those important programs is called the Sustainable and Resilient Communities Work Group. We don't come up with good names. I'm sorry. We just don't. But we have been able to hire 5 extension professionals through Sea Grant. We have one of them here today, Sarah Powell. And these are professional folks who are tasked with reaching out to the municipalities in the Long Island Sound watershed, and specifically the coastal communities, and helping them create resilience and sustainability plans, and to plan for sea level rise, to focus in their own community what's important, what do we need to protect, what do we need to change, how do we need to do it. And that includes Living Shorelines. Living Shorelines is a huge part of it, and green infrastructure, so that we allow the water to do what it's going to do, because you can't fight it. You just can't. And we know that storms and weather are going to become more extreme and more difficult to deal with. But this money that's coming through New York State with the fabulous program that Steve masterminded and helped create with the water infrastructure programs and that funding, that is to deal with our stormwater infrastructure, our sewer water infrastructure, and our drinking water infrastructure, all of which are greatly affected by all of these things. But I was happy to say that in the CCMP, the so aforementioned Bible of the Long Island Sound Study, we have specific action items that talk about living shorelines. So that means that the federal government, the state environmental agencies, the state legislature are all aligned to say this is important. And guess what? They have more money than they know what to do with right now. So we have to help them. We have to give them the perfect projects to say, this is a perfect opportunity for a living shoreline. This is an opportunity in our community. We want to protect this wetland, or we want to help homeowners change the way they deal with their lawns, their driveways. We want to retrofit this parking lot so that it's going to absorb stormwater, that it's going to filter stormwater. And I wanted to read you some of the language in the Long Island Sound, in the CCMP, which is called HW11, another really good name. In lieu of hard armoring, develop and promote the use of living shoreline habitat protection methods, dunes, shorelines, coastal marshes, and standardized living shoreline monitoring protocols while considering the habitat of the species of greatest conservation needs. It goes on. Another one, HW12, promote the conversion of existing armored shorelines, seawalls, riprap, and bulkheads to softer nature-based living shorelines to enhance habitat and habitat connectivity. There are 4 that I was going to point out to you that are in this plan that we are tasked with implementing, and there is lots of money to implement it. I wanted to let you know that the private property that Katie highlighted is actually in my viewshed of where I live. I live on a little inlet of Long Island Sound in Larchmont. At high tide, it's like a resort. At low tide, not so much. But that is an unbelievable accomplishment that's been done in this private property and can be done all over. And it's not only producing and creating more habitat, better habitat, and protecting that property against extreme storms, it has enhanced our whole neighborhood. I mean, it's unbelievable to be able to see this change. It's very beautiful. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that the Long Island Sound Study has a program called the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. And this is one of those funding mechanisms that Steve mentioned that we're going to talk about next week at the Association of Conservation Commissions. But the Long Island Sound Futures Fund is meant for implementation projects on the ground. That means nonprofit organizations and municipalities doing on-the-ground projects, green infrastructure, living shorelines, even education and outreach to your constituents and members. And this year, for 2022, the Futures Fund has $10 million in it. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of projects. And I want to encourage everyone here to say, I want to get that money. I want to get it for marshlands, for Mamaroneck, for Larchmont, for wherever you are, because that's what it's for. And the timing is not so great for this talk today because the applications are actually due at the end of May, unless you're very quick and have a project in mind that's already been engineered. But it is an annual process. And it is managed by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the Long Island Sound Study. And it's an opportunity for everyone to look at what kind of projects they want to do in their community and apply for funding for it. I want to also really encourage everyone, because there's a lot of cross-pollination here with the Long Island Sound Study and with this bill and with the DEC and funding from New York State, to look to the Long Island Sound Study, to remember Sarah Powell's name, and say, remember that there are people who want to offer, who are tasked with offering technical assistance to the municipalities, to the nonprofits, to try and use these funds to improve everyone's ability to deal with sea level rise and climate change. So to have formal plans that are acted upon and implemented in municipalities to deal with resilience and sustainability. I think that we're really lucky to have all these folks here. I know there's a lot of resources here. I've been doing this for a very long time, and it makes my head spin to think about all the different opportunities. I send emails out to everyone on a regular basis. Look at this one, look at this one, look at this one. But there are resources and there are folks who want to help. I'm offering myself as well as a resource for all of you because I want to connect everyone to these opportunities. Our existence kind of depends on it, and certainly the quality of our lives does. So everyone, go get it.
Well, I feel sort of bad. We started with this little thing about the bill, and then we grew into the big problem that we're facing. You're supposed to go the other way around, but it really all comes together. And last but not least, by any means, is County Legislator Catherine Parker, who I think all of you know, but I know her not only as a great partner, but for her leadership on environmental issues at the county board. She's chair of the Planning, Economic Development, and Energy Committee, on many other committees, but she's been absolutely a leader and instrumental in the passage of county environmental laws. And I would point out to people, sometimes people say, not in this room, why do we have county government? County government has been ahead of state government in the last few years, and we sort of raced to catch up with some of the bills that Catherine has introduced and gotten passed here to do at the state level. But the leadership of Catherine on these issues is transformative, not only for the county, but again, in pushing us at the state level and being a great partner. So I turn to you.
Thank you for that very nice introduction, Shelley. By the way, I have to say to all of you, we are talking to the right people. For those watching this later, you're missing out. This is a powerhouse of people that have been involved in environmental policy in the Sound Shore area. And I'm just going to name off some of the organizations because I think it is really important. We have my friends from the town of Mamaroneck Sustainability Collaborative, the Larchmont Environmental Committee, RISE Environmental Committee, and the Conservation Commission. We have from the Village of Mamaroneck, both the Environmental Committee and also my friend Randy Sellier, forgive me for pointing you out, former mayor of Pelham, moved to Mamaroneck and was scooped up immediately to serve on the coastal harbor
Coastal Zone Management.
Yes.
Another great name.
Yes, yes. And then my friend in the back of the room, Josh Nathan, city councilman from Rye. So we have and I don't have my glasses on, so speak up if there's somebody that I just missed that I should recognize. But we have a really great audience here. So the information about funding that Nancy just spoke of, I'm sure you were all taking furious notes, and I think that's fantastic, and that's great. And the project that I'm going to talk to you about, the Living Shoreline that we are doing at Edith Reed, it's really that area before you get right into Edith Reed, but as you've passed through the gate at Playland and you head down, this is the area that we're talking about, and we have some slides. So this probably looks a little bit familiar to most of you. And for those of you that have been in the community long enough, you know what happens after significant rainfall. This area just goes, the water comes in, it connects with Rye Lake, which is right behind that little strip of road and land. And the erosion that has been taking place over the years has been significant and only getting worse. And again, this is all due to climate change. As conservative numbers, as we've been talking about over the years, we've really underestimated. It is happening faster, more furiously, and the storms, as we're seeing, are much more severe, and we are really in a position where it's now or never. It was mentioned earlier that elections do have consequences, and in a good way. So when County Executive Latimer came into office, he's been a fantastic environmental partner, as I think you all know, and really put it out to all of our departments, the planning department, that look for opportunities to really focus on climate change and making a difference. And I think that was music to the ears of Rob Dosher, who I give him credit. This is his brainchild, his baby. He's in our planning department. He also is oversees our soil and conservation district. And Rob applied for a grant for this, so that's good news to the taxpayers as well. Who in the room was here in the fall when we did a presentation with Save the Sound? Hands, show of hands, few, all right. For some of you, some of these slides will be familiar, and for those that you get a second crack at it. So here we have the Living Shoreline. We'll go on to the next slide. Oh, is it up here? Oh, sorry. Yep. There we go. So as I say, there's the spit of land, and you really see how narrow that is. And it doesn't take a major hurricane. It is just a major rain event that really washes over from the Long Island Sound right over into Rye Lake. So the familiar slide, here we go. And as I had mentioned previously in the last time that we got together, you know, what we're trying to do as a green technique is going to be really all-encompassing. We are looking at absolutely, you see the breakwater with the vegetation optional. We're doing vegetation, we're doing the breakwater, and that looks like this. So you have the living breakwater that'll be out in the water. Then you have the marsh area. Right now, what you see there is Phragmites, which is an invasive species. This will give us an opportunity to plant native, and those natives will overtake the Phragmites. And as you go up, we are going to build up the tidal marsh area, and then for the bank face and the buffer area, really bolster that with dunes and berms, so that it will really, again, make that a natural hardening situation. So here's what it looks like for the area in the water. We're going to have the reef balls, and we do hope that that will become a home for oysters in the area, and the stone sills will be before that. So I have another slide. Hold on one second. And Spartina, again, to reduce the wave energy. And here you have it. So this is part of our design already. You've got the stone sills, the reef balls, and then you go up to the marsh. Now, where we are right now with the project is we are at 60% design. We should be at 90% by the beginning of June, so just a month away. It's moving right along. We have submitted all our permits for this. New York State DEC is on board. That's an important piece of it. And timing-wise, if everything goes according to plan, as we think it will, next winter, we will start with the first phase of it, which will be with the stone sills and the reef balls. Next spring, it will be followed by the buffer. And this is showing a little bit more of the buffer area. Now, we have hit one little snag, which I was just apprised of when, you know, Rob, I keep pitch hitting for him because he's so much better at this presentation, but he couldn't make it here today. He had somebody graduating in his family. I too had a graduate, but didn't conflict with this meeting. So the one little hiccup that we have is everybody recognizes this grassy area and knows that it's used as an overflow parking for both Edith Reed and Playland on very rare occasion. We use it generally 2-3 times a season for the big holidays, that's 4th of July, Labor Day, and Memorial Day. And, it's maintained as just, there aren't parking lines there, but we have attendants and, we fit some cars in. So initially, the design for that was to have the buffer area be about 50% of that parking area. And where we've reached a little bit of a hiccup is that we have a new partner in Playland, and our partner is looking at that and saying, hey, wait, hang on a minute, we have really big expectations for the park, and we think we're going to need that more than twice a season. And so we've now scaled that back from half of the area to about a third, but we still have not gotten agreement that that's where it needs to go. So now that I'm aware of that, I think I have a few phone calls that I will be making on that, and I feel fairly confident that we will reach an agreement, because I know from my conversations that I've had with Standard on other areas with Save the Sound, we're looking forward to even the main parking lot doing some really good environmental things, putting in some bioswales. And so I think in keeping with their brand and our brand, we're gonna make this happen. So that's my update on the project, and that's it. And that is quick, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Or Shelley, do you want to?
Yeah, we're going to take questions.
Okay, great.
So, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, so it really was, I feel very much more informed. I want to really thank my staff that worked on the bill and really learned so much. Mike Press, my legislative counsel in Albany, who worked on the bill with Save the Sound too. So,
Could I say something else about the bill, which, the importance of, we want to make sure that where there are regulatory issues, that there's a presumption
Yes.
at DEC that these kinds of projects are preferred. And so, I
Yes,
mean, I
we
think
made
that's
that.
the real message we're trying to send to them.
yes, okay, good, we agree. Questions?